This is Power Rising Summer series. If you are new here, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. If you've been here with us all summer, we're glad to have you back. It has been a series of events like this one all summer to help folks learn, connect, and figure out actions to take. If you are new to Arena, we offer 4 core services: training, career support, community, and toolbox. You can check out our career services on our jobs board, our talent bank. You are at a training now, and we'll have future trainings coming soon. We hope you check out the community Slack and check out some tools on arena.run/toolbox. We have 2 more events. You are here today, so great job reaching voters in the TikTok age. And then we will close out this summer series with a book club meeting on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern about Tyranny of the Minority. You have 2 days to read it, but you don't have to finish it to join. We hope you join if you're interested in talking about it, even if you've just read a little bit. First chapter. Um, Jess will be leading that. We also have an exciting expo hearing from political consultants and tech firms at the end of September. We hope you check that out. If you were at the first one, it is a slightly different lineup, so we hope you join us for that. Power Rising Summer is made possible by our incredible sponsors, Google, Grassroots Analytics, ROI, Winnable, Running Mate, and Sticky Notes Lab. They help keep these events low cost and free. And we couldn't do this without our partners. We have a whole slew of partners. Some of them are on our list right now, on the screen right now. And part of Power Rising Summer is connecting you to them if you want to get involved and take action with them. We've put up a poll, and if you are interested in being connected with them, please take the poll, and we will pass your information along to them and get you connected. We're going to leave that poll up for a little bit, but I'm going to move on the slide. A few housekeeping. Please leave your microphone muted. Chat moves fast, so if you have questions, use the Q&A chat box. Please don't spam the chat. We want to engage and build community, but not use that as a space for your own objectives today. Stay on topic and drop questions in the Q&A. We will email the recording and resources after the call. Don't worry. And please take the feedback survey at the end. We really value your feedback. And it is now my great pleasure to kick off the panel, Reaching Voters in the TikTok Age, and pass it over to our moderator, Scott.
Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for coming today to Reaching Voters in the TikTok Age. I believe personally that summer ends at the end of September. I think climate change has moved everything back a month, but that's neither here nor there. So I want to set the stage for what we're talking about today, because obviously everybody followed the election last year, close election and tough election, right? We want to talk about how progressives are communicating online and offline. And we want to talk about not just where we've been, but where we are now and where we're going. So that's how we're going to structure today's conversation. And 2 points that I want to bring up is for voters who consumed traditional media less. In 2024, it's been shown that the less traditional media that voters received or consumed regularly, the more likely they were to vote for President Trump. And Trump employed a strategy to go on podcasts to find young male voters to vote for him to fill out the coalition. And as we all know, Joe Rogan went on a lot of these podcasts, flagrant, so much so that 2024 has been dubbed the podcast election. But that's just where we've been, and we're going to talk a lot about where we're going today. So before we do that, we're going to introduce all our tremendous panelists. And I'm going to kick it over to Barrett to start, and then we'll go down the line and we'll kick it off. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Barrett Adair. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Resonate, a new organization very much designed to help bridge the gap between culture and politics online. Prior to that, I was the Creator Partnerships Manager at the Center for American Progress for about a year. And I've had my hand in a number of organizations and politics, have done a few campaign cycles, largely focused on digital strategy for the bulk of my career. After a short stint as a campus organizer, everyone's got to start somewhere. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be here. Happy to pass it to whoever.
I can jump in. Hi all, my name's Eve Levinson. I use she, her pronouns. Last cycle, I was the National Youth Vote Director for the Biden and then Harris campaign. I do feel like since that's a TikTok panel, I should preface I did not run the Kamala HQ accounts. I will mostly be talking today about how digital and these efforts can and should be integrated into other things or into other methods as well to be reaching young voters and these folks that we know are getting a lot of their information. On the campaign, I sort of oversaw dual political coalition and organizing programs, which meant that I was also managing our campus organizing staff. We had 150 folks across all of our battleground states, in addition to sort of the principal engagements that we did on campuses and virtual events and partnering with the digital team as well. I'm also the board chair for Voters of Tomorrow, which I know is one of the groups that is a partner on this, so shout out to them, and worked on a College Vote 2024 post-mortem this year, so got to gain a lot of insights there with an organization called Flight Desk, and super happy to be here and share some of those insights.
I can jump in. I'm Mike Pinson, Vice President of Ads at Blueprint Interactive, a digital strategy firm located in Washington, D.C. I've been with the team since 2016 and have worked on races up and down the ballot from your local city council race all the way up to presidentials. And today I'm going to talk about paid media strategy and kind of where we go from here and what we've done in the past.
And I think I round us out. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I am a senior digital strategist over at Social Current. Our really big job is that we help pair creators to progressive nonprofit organizations to help get all of their messaging out. Sorry, there's like a slew of bikers that decided to just go down our street. Prior to that, I actually got my start in the political space as a campus organizer, did a couple of elections all the way into 2022, and then I worked over in marketing at Act Blue. So always kind of adjacent to the space, but really excited to talk about some influencer strategies that we saw and where we're going.
Awesome. And I neglected to mention that I am obviously Scott Schuler, the content director for the progressive media organization, the American Experiment Project, and previously was a video creator at the Center for American Progress, briefly for a brief time with Barrett. And then I was a filmmaker in a past life. So we're going to start with where we've been, right? I'm going to kick this one to Eve first. So before we dive into talking about new media and everything new media, Eve and maybe Michael, can you tell us a little bit about like how campaigns traditionally reach voters with a specific eye to young voters online and off?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that one of the most important things here is to differentiate talking about college students and non-college youth, because the reality is that most of our programs that we do that are reaching quote unquote young voters are really targeting college students. There's a lot of reasons for that. We know they're all in one place. They're not going to be reached in sort of your general voter contact methods because they might not yet be registered where they're going to school. But I do think that's important because also when we talk about sort of the shift that we saw, we know that the shift to the right was more so among non-college youth. So I would say a really traditional like program to reach young people is a really GOTV oriented turnout operation on college campuses that's really focused on making sure students are registered to vote, know where to vote, and know how to vote. And I think that what we saw and what I saw particularly in this postmortem that I worked in is that folks are really looking for not just to be having that turnout, not just to be viewed as turnout targets, but to be having that persuasion as well, and that young people wanting to be engaged around that. I think the other big thing is that historically, we've also really looked at young people as folks that want to be reached on the issues, maybe more so than talking specifically about candidates. And we also saw a switch of that last cycle of young people yearning for more of that information to be hearing directly from candidates. And while issues are the most important, figuring out how to connect those issues. When we think about sort of how we look at young voters in past cycles, in 2018, it was gun violence prevention that we know drove into the polls. In 2020, it was COVID and racial justice, also obviously anti-Trump like everybody else. In 2022, it was reproductive rights. And then in 2024, what we saw for the first time is that the number one issue was the economy there. So in that way, I think young people are just like all other voters, but we also need to make sure that we're talking to them in a way that those issues make sense. I think that historically the way that young people are looked at being reached is sort of a dual approach of having in-person folks on campus and then reaching people online as well, which I can let somebody else speak more to.
Sure. I can kind of jump in from the campaign and the paid media side. Typically, campaigns kind of think about channels, how you might think about them, right? So primarily reaching them on social media, your meta platforms, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, places like a Snapchat, right, where people think, okay, this is where the young folks are. But they aren't necessarily thinking about how people are consuming the media on those channels, right? You're thinking about, oh, I'm watching something on my phone. Can I get that message if I might not be hearing sound, right? Am I putting in captions? Am I making these videos more accessible? And I think that's one thing that over the last 2 to 3 cycles, we have tried to kind of make more known to candidates that you have to think about where people are actually going to really receive the messaging, no matter where they are.
Yeah, there's a big thing that I like to talk about is just like meeting people literally where they are online. So like we're going to talk about channels, we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff. But speaking with online, let's move now to where we are. So we're going to talk a little bit about the general media landscape, and I'm going to kick it to Maria first, maybe Barrett after. Like, what types of media are voters consuming, and how is that different than 4 years ago?
Yeah, well, even as recently as like a couple weeks ago, a lot of studies in the past couple months after the election have come out to say that the average young person is actually not getting their news or any kind of updates from traditional media anymore. I think it's something crazy like 70 to 80% of young people are actually getting their news from social media, and TikTok specifically is a big driver of that. So when we want to talk about getting people informed on the issues, on the candidates, on things like that, we do really need to be intentional on how and where we meet them. And if that is TikTok, if that's Instagram, if that's new platforms that pop up, a lot of creators are building out Substacks, Discord channels. Like we really need to start investing into those and looking into those if we want to get our messaging across. But I'll pass it over to Barrett.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think in addition to so many people getting their news online, and especially through vertical video formats, which have exploded in popularity in the last handful of years, certainly in the last election cycle, people we now know are getting their news largely on accident, which I think is a very interesting statistic. I think over 50% of the population in the months following the election, burnout, what have you, admitted that they no longer seek out the news and assume that it will find them, and they assume correctly. So I think like we're not only competing for attention with like other folks who are trying to distribute news and points of view, et cetera, et cetera. We're also competing with just every possible consumable piece of content online. This informs a lot of my work, trying to fit politics into more cultural spaces. It's all in the service of trying to reach new audiences that are not only less likely to see your content, but like possibly actively avoiding it if you don't make a considerable effort to put it in front of them.
So let's talk about those voters who are like actively avoiding a lot of what we're trying to put out there. This gets back to the thing I said at the beginning with voters who do not engage in traditional news, do not seek out political news. I think we're more able to be persuaded by the sort of Trump vibes of it all. You know, as a 21-year-old, I was completely not politically engaged at all, but I did vote for Barack Obama just based on, I think, who my parents voted for, who everybody around me voted for, and on the vibes. You know, I'd say Obama was the coolest show in town. Now, Trump is a very strong political communicator. So moving to talking about disaffected folks who are avoiding actively engaging. Let's talk about like how we can get to these folks who don't want to engage with our media.
I can kind of start off there. So a lot of the work we do over at Social Current and the majority of the creators we work with actually would identify themselves as non-political creators. Politics is not the main thing they do. So we have like mom vloggers, you have gaming creators, food content people that we've been able to reach. And what they really love to be able to do is take some of the talking points that these organizations want to amplify and weave it very seamlessly into their own content. So, like a good example is recently we had someone who her whole page is talking about recession-proof meals and like budgeting and meal prepping in a way that makes sense for the current economy. So her audience isn't necessarily looking for updates on the news or anything on how like politics is impacting our stuff, but they do care to a certain extent. So when we worked with her, it was really seamless to be able to talk about how tariffs are affecting our everyday grocery bill and things like that. And these creators have a very unique way of being able to talk about these things where it's less political and it's more just cultural. And I think that's something that the right did very intentionally in the last election was they didn't really run on platform. They ran on vibes and they ran on the atmosphere and they aligned themselves very much with here is right-leaning policy and here's just like pop culture moments without being so in your face. And I think that is something that we are doing. I think it's just there's a level of like we want to control certain narratives, but letting these creators really just like trust their audiences and kind of have those communications. But the more we can get working with people who don't see themselves as like, oh, well, I don't talk about politics. It's like, but it affects all of us, you know? And making the messaging fit so that they feel like they have the power to talk on these things too.
Yeah, we really need to like leave room for our figures from a national level to become these like cultural figures, right? Who didn't see the photos of Trump working at McDonald's or on the garbage truck? And I feel like I have the images of like Trump dancing on stream with Aiden Ross seared into my head in a way that I truly wish I would not have. So let's move to talking about like where we're going, right? Because this is the big question. And we don't just want to talk about the national level. I can default to national a little bit too much, but this year we have state elections in Virginia, New Jersey, other places. And next year we have the 2026 midterms. So thinking about local and state races for as much as national, let's talk about like what is the ideal way? And this is a broad question. I'm going to kick it to you first, Eve. Ideal way of communicating with voters in these upcoming elections.
Yeah, definitely. Before I answer that, I do want to hit really quickly on the question about vibes, because I think that sometimes when we talk about why it's important to have to allow for authenticity, I think sometimes we can forget that that doesn't exist in a silo from making sure that we're being substantive. And one of the biggest things that like we heard from campus organizers when I was doing this postmortem was that like as an ecosystem, we over-indexed on vibes over policy when reaching young people. We focused so much on this idea of like, and again, I'm speaking of the ecosystem here, probably not trying to point fingers of like, oh, Kamala's cool brat summer, etc., and weren't necessarily, yes, Jess, sorry, just put brat summer in the chat, and weren't necessarily complementing that with how are we equipping these folks that we're sending out there to be able to talk about the policies and how it's impacting people's lives. So I think it's just really important that while we need to make sure that we are reaching people in those fun and exciting ways, it needs to be complemented with the substance, because that is what folks want. And I think that oftentimes when we're talking about young people, it's viewed as an either or situation. And when we over index on one, they're going to tune out. If you're talking too much about policy, you're not going to reach them if you're not engaging with them on the non-political things that they want. And you can totally do both. I just wanted to name that. In terms of sort of the ideal of how we reach those folks tactically, I think it's an all of the above approach, right? We talk a lot about how everybody's in their own sort of like media ecosystem, how it's also individualized, it's hard to reach those people. And the reality of it being hard to reach them is that we need to do all of it to reach those people. You don't know whether or not some post that somebody puts out is going to reach them. You don't know whether or not they're going to be standing there in the quad when you're there doing your high traffic canvassing. So you need to figure out how to do all of it. That looks very different, I think, on a different scale, right? Like on a presidential level, that should literally mean like all of it and trying to invest in all of it. On a local level, that might mean needing to figure out like, okay, if we think there are these 6 ways to reach people, how do we make sure that we're investing in 3 of them rather than just 1 of them? How do we make sure that we are on at least 2 of the social media platforms and doing something in person? But I do think being clear that like it needs to be all of the above and figuring out how are we seeding that information there and having that surround sound approach for people that is making sure to break through in the non-political avenues as well.
Yeah, I think traditional campaigns, especially statewide ones and national ones, have relied really heavily on paid ads. So, Mike, I'm going to kick it over to you here, talking about like what's able to cut through in 2026 and beyond from a paid ads perspective, and then we're going to talk about that sort of organic, influencing that organic media ecosystem, like Maria talked about, because people are getting their political information on accident.
Sure. I would say that the most effective message is the one that you can deliver authentically and stand behind, right? I think one thing that we've seen with a lot of our races are the ones that get up early, define who they are, define the messaging of the race are the ones that are actually going to ultimately be the most successful. If you're constantly on the defensive, trying to fight against attacks, right? Like every time, every second that you're spending explaining is a moment that you're losing, right? So I think being up early, making it clear who you are, what you believe in, and being able to substantiate that, because I do think one of the things that paid digital can do best is substantiate your messaging from other channels, whether that's organic digital, whether that's amplifying messaging that you're seeing on TV or through mail or other mediums, right? You can use that to boost what you're putting out there far beyond your organic reach.
Yeah, I think we see this from a national level, like certain elected officials, like I keep coming back to Trump, know really how to push the narratives they want to talk about from a national level using organic media, right? Things that drive conflict, things that are very clickable. So much of, I think, where we are now goes back to the incentives of the internet, right? Conflict drives clicks, right? And then they can sell more ads based on our watching. So using the incentives of, I guess, the new media ecosystem in mind, Barrett, do you want to talk about like how to integrate new approaches to creator work and sort of beyond creator work? Because I know Resonate does a lot of things.
Yeah. So I think that we are still sort of in very much like a phase 1 with creator work. I was sort of called to this line of work through like a series of events. Notably that as far back as 2015, frankly, I noticed that the right was sort of seizing on internet culture in a very different way, including cozying up to certain influencers. And from the get-go, the right was targeting people with the audiences they wanted and not necessarily people who aligned with them and like people who were already espousing right-wing news. So like you had kind of like early days where these sort of like Jake Paul cinematic universe is like being embedded with Trump world because they wanted the people who watch him to pay attention. And not only was that strategic in like building very, very early bridges between a party's politics and what it would soon become and a cultural space, it's also like kind of creating this conveyor belt of new right-leaning voters because you're targeting slightly younger people as well. And I think we've really seen the fruits of that after almost a decade. Like we now have this giant issue of like young men skewing right. That didn't happen in a year. That happened in about a decade. And that's something that I think we don't like really appreciate enough. I think that after like years and years and years of really dropping the ball on this, um, 2024 was frankly the first year where there was any sort of significant push, any notable push from the Democrats to involve creators in their work. And I would still say it was extremely elementary as opposed to like what the right have been doing for a very long time. I am so eternally grateful for our creators who like do predominantly post about left-leaning politics and really have that agenda in all of their content. They're my friends, they're close partners. That being said, we aren't breaking out of our echo chambers. And I say this as somebody who like kind of came to creator work by running my own creator account that is like very much a political echo chamber. But I also like weave in a lot of pop culture, a lot of comedy, a lot of nostalgia bait and such into my content. And that's the sort of thing that I try to prioritize when I'm working with politicians and current elected officials and groups to reach new audiences. We want to get people who are friendly to our cause, but we want to get people whose audiences are maybe not thinking about politics 100% of the time. I'm really, always constantly looking to build out our primary verticals, which are folks who are making parenting and family content, health and wellness content, sports content, which is a whole new world for me that I'm really interested in, personal finance, and sort of a catch-all cultural thought leaders. I'm really grateful that I've been able to leverage relationships that I built outside of the political world just by being a sort of likable, humorous, and like less explicitly political creator online to encourage more people with platforms like that to make content with elected officials where they wouldn't necessarily before. So yeah, I think that's the approach to it. Like we've got a lot of catching up to do compared to what the right has built. And I think there have been like some really admirable strides made this year. I think we've got a lot of ways to go in like just getting that cultural audience.
Yeah, we've really focused on this with the American Experiment Project. A great guy, one of my favorite creators we've worked with, is at AB the Artist, who was for many years, I think, a GTA, Grand Theft Auto creator, and now has moved more towards politics. And we've helped set up him, his brother Jay William Jay, with a new podcast called the Jam Pod, JAAM, where they talk about culture. They go at a lot of these red pill men on the internet. They call out celebrities who are, like Snoop Dogg just complained about, I think, LGBT themes in movies. And a lot of times this is the way, from a national perspective, that we can reach voters or reach young people talking about values through culture as opposed to issues. But moving more towards like local and state level races, right? Not everything is national. Like Maria, I'm going to go to you first. Eve, Mike, look into y'all as well. Like, let's talk about like what has been a good way that these state races, these local races, have been able to use our new media ecosystem.
Yeah, I think our biggest thing is when we're brought on for any kind of organization, whether that's a campaign or just a nonprofit, getting as tailored with our creators as we possibly can. There is no town that doesn't have at least a creator in it, or that there isn't a creator close by that has the reach necessary. So it's really okay to experiment with who you work with. And you don't always have to work with huge creators. Oftentimes, like, I think about my home state of North Carolina. Like, I live in Raleigh, but I get mostly on my For You page creators from Charlotte. There's a couple of Raleigh creators for sure, but like that is, and they're big in our local ecosystem. Like everyone knows these creators by name. And so you can not rely on these big national names. You can really start working with small creators. Um, Even as small as like 20K, 10K, all of them have engaged audiences. And it really is sometimes even the smaller creators that have audiences that are more likely to take action and that are more likely to follow through on stuff like that. And so we try to work with them as much as humanly possible, especially when they are super relevant in their own cities and states. And that's kind of how we diversify a lot of our campaigns. And then we try to weave in paid ads as much as humanly possible. Our big thing really just is watch the content, see how it performs, see what resonates with the audience, and then put some paid money behind it, right? So if you really want to start targeting, but you notice that the reach was a little low, but the engagement was really, really high, put some money behind that, target it into the region, into the section that you really need. I think there's a world in where organic can work really beautifully with paid ads, where it doesn't have to be this fully scripted, thought out ad. It can be just boosting these creators' content.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything Maria just said. Um, and I think even to the point, I don't even think you need to be that big of a creator. I think it's really more about getting that local feel, right? Seeing the restaurants and the uh, you know, environment that you're representing, right? Like that goes a long way, right? To your point about kind of leveraging organic and paid media, that's also a very cost-effective way of doing that, right? You can basically, get it you can kill two birds with one stone there, for lack of a better phrase. But yeah, no, it's super, super important. Um, it really shows a real connection to the community.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it at the local level also is especially where sort of this distinction between like what does it mean to be working with a creator versus like what does it mean to be doing digital organizing and like organizing small voices online, like that wall really disappears. I mean, it disappears in general, but it's the bigger your campaign is, I think, and the more and the broader the geographic reach is, I think the easier it is to view those things as different. But the reality, right, is like if you're looking at how to reach people in a small geographic area, you have to think about both who the follower, maybe where that person's from, but who their followers are. And you don't always have that information. Different platforms give you different amounts of information. Some of them you have to pay a lot for those tools there, right? But the reality is that like getting folks and organizing people to post on their social media, if they're your volunteers, they're going to have those voices like that they're going to have reach there in the same way that like we view relational organizing. That was like a really big thing that we did using the Reach app last cycle. I think also specifically like college campuses to me are in some ways an even easier place to identify these folks than in other places in communities, right? Like, who those people are in the same way, right? That like, it's important for an organizer to go out there and build relationships with those like community leaders, right? I encourage people to think about, okay, if you have like, if you need to do a number of one-on-ones, like those one-on-ones can include those campus influencers. Who is the person that's on that sports team that's posting about stuff that people are listening to? Who's the person that's leading the sorority or in the frat or whatever group that is, right? And figuring out how are you working with them and equipping them to be sharing that information. And again, I think there, especially when you're looking at the folks who maybe like you're not necessarily going through an agent or whatever, like really being flexible and like in sort of bringing both the best practices and how do you approach a volunteer leader and how do you approach an influencer and how are you looking at this person as somebody that can help you reach these people and like what information or resources do they need to go out there and be a good ambassador to their community that you want to reach.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one other thing. I think especially when we're talking about like being with the community, I think sometimes we forget influencers exist off the internet. And so investing in like in-person events for influencers is really, really important. And that's something that we've noticed with our creators and we try and weave in with anyone we work with is kind of stressing like in-person events and whether it's tailored for the creator or not. Like we had one campaign where we sent two creators from the Chicago area to go canvassing with the organization and they made content off of that. They're like, this is what I got up to today. And those videos particularly perform really, really well. And it also like it's a good way for you to build a relationship with them where it doesn't feel super transactional. And it's also a good way for them to feel like they're part of kind of that community. So if there's ever, it's not fit for every single campaign, but if there ever is a chance to do kind of in-person stuff with the creators, I would always say like kind of go for it. They're almost always more than excited to go to these events and meet all these people. And also just it allows you'll be shocked how much content you actually get out of it. We might contract them for one video and then magically 6 more get posted from the same thing, so it is really beneficial when you're able to do so.
Borrowing this from, I can't remember who said this, but it was like, if you're a small campaign, you need to know who the local reporters are in your town, right? So we need to just expand that idea to knowing who the local creators are, right? Knowing who the local channels that might be digital first, but are still have a heavy presence in your area. I like to think about the Tennessee Holler, run out of Tennessee. Uh, they have 10 regional hollers, and while not all of their audience is based in Tennessee, like I think if somebody's running for office in Tennessee and is not involved there, like they'd be good folks to check out with or to check out. So one other thing I think that's come up when working or like thinking about the internet is a question around like Zoran Mamdani, right? The method versus the message is a big question. Some people would say that Democrats or elected officials can go on TikTok all they want, but if they're preaching the same sort of something, it's not really going to resonate. Can we talk about like how you've seen this play out within your work? And, as a lot of times as communicators, we don't necessarily have the control of what that message is, but a lot of times I feel like what's good for the internet is like filtering into what we're talking about. So Eve, I'm going to kick it to you first, and then let's feel free to go from there.
Yeah, I think, and I think this was discussed in the chat a little bit. I think that like Zoran's campaign is sort of the perfect example of what I was talking about before about like it's not vibes or substance, it's both of them, right? And I think that like with Zoran's campaign, you have a combination of like a messenger that's like really charismatic and that like people really like, some like a team and an individual that like are really digitally fluent. But also I think, right, like they're getting super specific on policy. Like their mailers were specified to like where they were being sent individually, which like reminded me of like when I like to like individualize what we're doing based off of a specific campus. They are taught when they're talking about like they're hitting on the issues that we know people care most about, all people, including young people, which is like the economy, but they're contextualizing it to like cost of living and what does that mean for an individual. And I think that like that is really the key there. Like it's not just going out and saying why the economy is not working for people, but what is that positive vision to do that? And also it's not just, I think, especially with young people, at times, a lot of the ways we talk about the economy isn't how they are interacting with the economy as young adults, as young professionals, as students, right? I like to reference a lot that like when we talked a lot about student loan forgiveness, that most young people were not eligible for that because you had to have been paying off your loans for 10 years. That means that when you're talking about that, they're not seeing in that community. If you're talking about how to make first time um how to make it more affordable to buy a home for the first time, most young people aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about their rent, they're thinking about their public transportation, they're thinking about their groceries. And so I would actually argue that I think like that is one of the reasons and sort of the key component to that campaign success is that focus on that and those really specific policies and explaining them in a way that work well. I would be super curious to see like if you took a similar really focusing on policy, explaining it and pairing that with like really good digital, but with like different solutions to economics, would that work as well? I don't think we know because I don't think we have something to compare it to that's like, okay, they did all the tactics the same, but they had like a different policy proposal. And so I think that a lot of that is getting meshed together where it's probably like all of the above. And it's really hard to pinpoint, like, is it that one thing? Would that same digital strategy work with a different message? We don't know because I haven't seen somebody try that effectively.
Yeah, the Mamdani campaign did a very good job of bringing it local. I think somebody just said this in the chat, like filming in bodegas, filming in halal carts, and just really compelling stuff. So we're going to turn now to your questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. There's a lot of stuff going on in the chat, so it'll be more helpful to organize it there. And Mike, I'm going to kick it to you first. Like one of the earliest questions we got was interested to hear more about the role that personal narrative plays in delivering the news and just generally cutting through. So this can be from a paid ad perspective or just broadly.
Sure. I mean, I think it's definitely important. I think one thing to consider, particularly when thinking about digital advertising, is the actual structure of it. I mentioned it before, but right, a digital ad isn't like a TV ad. If you think about a typical TV ad, it's probably 30 seconds. You've got a little time to build a story, right? You kind of come to a point, right? And you hammer it again. With the digital ad, you've maybe got 3 seconds to keep people's attention, right? So you kind of have to make your point up front and then substantiate it over and over again. And not only that, you have to see it a lot of times. Because like I said, people are looking at it on their phone, they're not really paying attention. They're watching TV, they're probably looking at a second screen, right? So it's really more, I think you can go with the personal narrative, but I think you have to think about it inherently differently. But I think it's certainly useful. And yes, to Jess's point, even a third screen. I've definitely been guilty of that myself.
And we're going to try to, there's a lot of questions, so we're going to try to work our way through all of these. So Maria, I'm going to go to you next here. We got a question from Claire. How do we find, or how would somebody find smaller creators? For example, want to engage with voters in a rural area? Like, what strategies would you recommend?
I'm a big fan of just kind of looking at what is relevant in that area. So like when we're looking for smaller creators, I particularly like to start with any sort of kind of parenting niche or travel content. A lot of those creators will have that. People will be tagged in them. I also like going into some of the larger ones and seeing who they follow or who they repost. A lot of times larger creators will go and repost smaller creators that are a little bit more central to what area you're in. TikTok also has like a nice feature. If it's not TikTok, it's Instagram, but you can look at a map and kind of see um, anything hashtag like local NC Eats is a really big one. Whenever if someone wants to like look up North Carolina-based creators, I start with that hashtag and I start scrolling. The more you scroll, the more you find, and then the easier it becomes to kind of search for them. But I think it just depends on who you want to message to directly. But you find one and you can sometimes find a handful.
Yeah, and one thing I want to make a plug for is maybe the oldest social media site is Facebook. Um, People really still use Facebook. I don't, but people do. And it's really important that, especially building a campaign, especially in a more rural area, that you have your Facebook presence, because it might not be the new hotness, but it's still like some crazy percentage of the world and Americans are still on there. So Barrett, I'm going to turn to you here. Uh, I've got a question. Sometimes your social media audience may be people who don't live in your district. How do we pivot in turning those followers into potential donors? What is that elevator pitch from converting a national audience towards more localized race?
Yeah. So I have never run a like principles, like a account for somebody actually running elected office, but I can talk about the strategy that I personally employ when trying to make the best use of whatever audience I have, right? So a really good way to do this, I think, is to understand what percent of your audience is outside of the actual district you're trying to target, et cetera. And communicate with those people in a way that ultimately helps you. I do think like simply encouraging people to fundraise and addressing folks outside of the district, state, et cetera, directly, and call them out sort of and say like, you might not live here, you might not be able to vote for me, but you're clearly following this account because you support this campaign in some way. We could always use out of state volunteers. If you have the infrastructure for that, we could always use small dollar donors, every little bit counts, et cetera. And we could also use you to spread the gospel, so to speak, to the people you know that actually do live in a place where they could vote for that elected official, for that candidate, rather. I do this very, very directly with my audience, not like personally running for office or anything, but I do this a lot with like bits of news, for example. My issue is less about like geographic location and trying to reach people who like actually have the power to elect me to office, but I experience an issue where, like I said before, like we're kind of existing in an echo chamber. I know that most of the people that I'm talking to are left leaning, share the vast, vast majority of my values, and that talking to them can be cathartic and it can be helpful in creating community and maybe informing them about something that they don't already know about. But it doesn't do anything to persuade somebody to my side, right? So something I will do frequently is call them out directly and say, like, this is a piece of information that would be really, really relevant to your parents if they're voting. This is a piece of information that would be really, really relevant to any parents in your life, et cetera, et cetera. And so I try to call attention to the groups of people that they need to be in communication with and what next steps they can accomplish there. And I think there is a way to replicate that with an audience that you're trying to target for an election as well. There's always something useful that one of your followers can do for you.
From a just in a like the point of elected officials who I think are doing this well, digital well, like I like to point to examples. So Representative Melanie Stansbury out of New Mexico is a House rep who has one of the largest followings I've seen from a House rep. And she does it doing these like 5, 6 minute breakdowns of what's happening in the Capitol. And so it's not everything is like a 30-second captions, like flashy something. It's building a genuine relationship with your audience. Another couple elected officials I like to check their channels on are Andy Kim, senator from New Jersey, does a good job of just like really formatting his videos, making them very watchable. He says, here are the 3 things you missed in the Capitol this week, and he breaks it down very understandable way. Representative Lauren Underwood does really good town hall videos because that can be really compelling content. Sometimes you don't have to create bespoke stuff. Sometimes you can repackage what we already have. So one thing, like Barrett, you just talked about parents, and one question we just got in was how much of this general new media advice applies to older voters?
A ton of it. So the polling tells that this is like one of my favorite facts, because I think that it, it is, and I'm not like trying to be like offensive or anything. It is like a very commonly held, rather outdated idea that like social media is for young people. And frankly, we have overwhelming evidence that people of absolutely all age groups are using social media. They're using social media daily. There isn't like a clear divide on like who is using it more than anybody else. There isn't a clear divide on who is posting more than anybody else. I think the closest you really get to a division is platform to platform. What a slightly older demographic might prefer to post and consume content on versus a younger person. There is some truth to the matter that like TikTok is largely for younger people where Facebook is for older people. Like you'd be right about that, but they're all using it. And they're all kind of using everything to at least some degree. So I think that's just something to keep in mind when you are posting original content, right? Like, or if you're collaborating with somebody on that, there is a chance that really anybody could see it. Like you don't need to do what's up fellow kids because it's not just fellow kids who are going to see it. There are but at the same time, like I think it's very fair to do a little A/B testing with your own content. You don't want anything to feel completely not palatable to a larger audience, but it would be fair to make something one day that is like maybe like could appeal to just about anybody and make something one day that is like perhaps a specific reference to somebody who is in your generation if you are a principal, or perhaps make a reference to something that would appeal to your own parents or directly to your kids, whatever. I think as long as you're sort of playing the field with content, not everything has to appeal to everybody, but you should make stuff that appeals to everybody at some point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure and blessing that my dog, who's behind me, has not started barking. But the cat's on the move, so we got to be careful.
Yeah, my darling, the vacuum is her sworn enemy. I apologize for her.
All right, so we've got a big question here about misinformation. And Eve, I'm thinking about kicking this one to you. Like, the question says, how do you suggest using social media to fight, like TikTok, to fight misinformation? And I just made a remark to a friend earlier this morning that social media feels like a bastion of misinformation. I swear, I go to the search tab and it's like I'm clicking things, and then the video is not really about what the headline said it was about, or it's from like 7 months ago. It's a very different thing. So using social media and communication channels to fight misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult, right? Because I think also on the same note, and then I'll answer that question, but I think on the same note, right, while we know that being online is a really important place to reach people, I think there also are pockets of people that are starting to be turned off because they know that there's so much misinformation there, right? Who are starting to be like, oh, well, how do I know what I could trust? And I think, like, not to be broken record, but that's why I think it's so important that we take like a multifaceted approach when reaching people, because like whatever people you're trying to reach, there are going to be people there that are you're only going to reach online, and there are going to be people there that you can't reach online at all. I think that what's the most important there is like building it, like figuring out how to make your channel the place that people feel trustworthy, right? And that they go to for that information, and then partnering with the folks that also are viewed that way. I think in the same way, right, that like frequently when folks go to vote for elections, maybe they go and they look at like who are the groups that they know that have put out like an endorsement list right there. I feel like for some people, right, there are those creators that are becoming those folks, but like how do you go to those folks and work with them? I think this is also a place where I think there's an interesting question about like where do those more political creators play that role there, right? I think that there are a lot of those like large political accounts that people go to and they trust because they know they will get that information. There's the validity of them having partnered with establishments and stuff before. And so I think that there's a role there, but I think that I don't think there's a simple answer to this. I think it's like the ongoing question. And I think it's always hard to figure out when the same sort of platform is maybe causing that sort of distrust, like how do we then utilize that platform and folks that we trust on that platform to rebuild the trust, I think is really tricky.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I feel like it's a question I hear a lot. There's that saying, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth puts its shoes on, or something like that. I think I just botched that. But we're getting towards the end here, and I want us to focus on what we're doing well and like some hope going into 2025, 2026, and beyond. It's a dark time. There's a lot of very troubling things happening, especially if you buy Trump's media narratives. Uh, you know, Democrats are in a tough spot. But there's lots of things to look forward to. So moving towards what's going to be probably our last question, I want to give everybody an opportunity to get in here. What gives you hope from a media perspective or otherwise as we head into the 2025 state elections and beyond? Open floor.
Sorry, I tend to be a bit of an optimist when it comes to politics, because I have to be kind of. I think that, I kind of like answered my first question on this panel talking about how we are lagging behind the right a lot. And while I do firmly believe that's true, I am extremely heartened by the efforts to do something and catch up. I think that is not something I take for granted at all. I think there is a huge, huge call right now for people on our side to do a lot more and to be competitive online. And I think that is very, very fair. And I think there is a lot that like Dems need to do to meet that call, but it's really day and night, frankly, from where we were on like November 1st, 2024 to today. Like they know there's efforts being made, and I'm really happy about that. I think the only place we can go is up. I think it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of strategy and a lot of relationship building and participation from so many people inside of the Beltway and outside of it. And it's a massive undertaking, but the energy and the just cognizance that being bland and boring and prescriptive and using social media as yet another place to post a press release and not as an actual form of communication directly with your voters and the people who can support you and the people who are like desperate and upset and like foaming at the mouth about the Trump administration. I think those days are largely over, and there's like a considerable effort being made. It makes me very, very happy that we're just in a better place. I am frankly also optimistic long term that Trump can't run again, despite his threats. He can't actually run again. And that was like kind of the first tiny little glimmer of hope that I had post election, was just like, well, like I'm devastated, but also like this is the last Trump election I need to live through. And I think that he is a very, very specific character, sort of. And I think that anyone else on the right has and will continue to struggle to capture the precise sort of attention that he has over the past several years. And it frankly puts us at a competitive edge, in addition to him just sucking and nobody liking him. So that is what makes me hopeful for the future.
I can go next. My answer is gonna be very similar. I think I definitely fall victim too often of being online and just seeing lots of doom and gloom about nobody's ever doing anything. But when I really take a step back, I do see a lot of energy, particularly from folks who want to run. Like I've seen a ton of potential first-time candidates who they want to get out and hit the ground running, right? Like I've had several who have June primaries and they want media plans that start in November, right? Like they want to get up, they want to be out there, they want to, engage. And I think that's really encouraging, mostly because I've spent years trying to get them to think about being up and actually engaging in the digital space. And I think we're really finally hitting that it's really sinking in, but I think is really encouraging. I think generally the the folks around them as well. I mean, we mentioned digital fluency earlier. I think overall it is raising, and I think we're going to see a lot of interesting new things in the coming years.
I think a few things here. I think one is, I think especially digital and youth used to be viewed as one and the same. And I think it's good that they're being viewed as different now. I think there needs to be like good connectivity there, but like as has been mentioned here on this panel, like everybody's on the internet and also young people are not only on the internet. And I think that like getting better at understanding that is crucial to like making good plans about both how to reach young people and how to engage effectively digitally. I think I'm also optimistic that folks are starting to realize that like young people are not our persuasion audience. I think that that is really important because they have just been viewed as sort of a turnout audience historically. And I would also say, and yes, this is a joke, but it's also true that like I think we're fine. I think many people are moving away from this. We need to find like the Joe Rogan of the left thing. And I think everybody needs to move away from that. And if it's that people realize that they didn't find one, so they should focus on other stuff, like that's good with me too. But there's a lot of other places we can put that energy as we discussed today.
Yeah, I think we always talk about at Social Current, we're like, we don't need the Joe Rogan of the left. They're already there. We just need to invest in them and give them the support that they need because Joe Rogan didn't become Joe Rogan overnight. I think for myself, it's the eagerness that is coming out, both from creators and organizations as a whole. I think for a while we really had to push really hard for organizations to kind of take the leap of faith almost to get on the social space and do it in a way that would be organic to these creators. And now they are like they're more willing to experiment and they're more excited to kind of try new things and see what works. And I think having that kind of boldness to do so is really beneficial. And that same boldness is reflected within the creator space. More and more people are openly talking about it. More and more non-political creators, more lifestyle people are starting to use their platforms to speak up. And that's not something we really saw. There was kind of this push of like, well, I need to protect my brand. I need to protect an image. I need to, protect whatever comes. But I do love seeing that more people are willing to come forward and kind of talk and work with these organizations that they firmly believe in, but they now want to like vocally talk on. So yeah, just the sheer excitement. I think it would have been very easy post 2024 election to sit for a long time in like the sadness we all collectively felt when that was the election result and the fact that people didn't, that they were ready to get up and like join together. I think that keeps me going way more and it gets me excited for 2026.
Yeah, we fundamentally have energy on our side. And when when we're on our back, it gives us an opportunity to define a new, better path. So, might not go to the same old elected officials, the same policies that we've been running on. I think we've seen that in New York and we'll see that other places. So Thank you so, so much, everybody. Thank you, Barrett, Eve, Mike, Maria. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Arena, so much for coming today. Can't tell you how much we appreciate your time and your interest. And please come to the next Arena panel and the one after that. And don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you all so much.